And we are live. Welcome to another session of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Carl Hellberger, who is the Vice President of the Security Service of Cybersheath Service International. And that's a bit of a mouthful, especially for me, Carl. Thank you very much for joining the show. Much appreciated. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Really enjoy being on this show. It looks like you're from a very dark location, like a submarine or something like that.
Undisclosed.
Undisclosed submarine location. This is my first podcast from live from a submarine. I think in New York, right?
So, Carl, you and I have a bit of a history. It goes way back. You participated in a few of my in-person events in New York and so on, and I just noticed that organically, one of your presentations that I recorded and published on YouTube has thousands of views, and completely organically. I don't know if people are looking for you specifically. I think they are. And it's a combination of the topics you speak on. I think it's also a combination of how great you deliver the material. And again, it's not to butter you up. You're a great speaker. I had an opportunity and the pleasure to see you speak in several events. And but yeah, people organically looking for that content. So thank you very much for joining. Much appreciated. So let's dive right in. So first and foremost, I can't continue without exploring a little bit of your background. You started as in physical security as being in the kind of the air crew of B-52s.
Yeah, I was. I don't know if it was physical security. I was actually electronic warfare officer, but I guess everybody in the military fancies themselves to have a little bit of physical security as part of who they are. First of all, I got to thank you for that lead in. And I also am like, I think to myself, I feel likewise with you. You can tell I've been trying my whole life to actually become your hairline, and I'm close. I think I'm really close.
You're doing a great job, Carl. Every few years, I talk to you, we're becoming more and more alike.
Like, exactly. It'll be soon. You can just interview yourself and we'll be finished with it. And I have to pay you that damn $20 too early for that introduction, because it was really great.
It's all true.
I'm a little humbled by it. I'm actually a lot humbled by it. Yeah, B-52s is how I started on life. I'm one of those kids that grew up wanting to fly my whole life, and went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University to be flight. I had a full ride Air Force scholarship, and I had a billet, is what they call it, for a navigator slot. Graduated high enough in my navigator training to become an electronic warfare officer, and got to be in what we call an operational jet that does bomb dropping, right? And did that for 6 years, many deployments, many great stories. I'm sure you could probably relate, especially being part of the Israeli military. Last 2 years in the Pentagon, where I did this crazy thing, and they took me kicking and screaming out of the cockpit to do cyber warfare. And, for all of you kids out there that think you know what you want to do in your life, I give you this one good piece of advice that I got in high school. And I could have told you, I would have paid you $1 million to tell you that it was wrong advice. And the person said, I don't care what you start out with in life, what the name is on your card in that first job, the job that you have 20 years later likely doesn't exist today and will not be the same thing that you have in your card today.
Yeah, that's truly amazing advice, and it's so true. And I think that the velocity and the pace of things and how to need to adjust are just increasing, right, Carl? I mean, we've seen this industry is moving, the speed of light, and if companies were able to review their firewall posture for 7-8 years, and then their MDM for about mobile device management for another 2, things are now accelerating and becoming even more pronounced. And that leads me to the next question. So you are now part of an organization to provide services around compliance, specifically for for government compliance, like CMMC and so on. Maybe you can kind of describe what problems you solve today for customers.
It's so funny, honestly, if you would have told me 5-6 years ago I'd be a compliance guy. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a CISP, have been for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, since 2001, whatever that makes. And, and I understand the importance of compliance, and I've done it here and there in my life. But boring, right? It's like, it's generally boring. It's not, I understand it's important, but it was, to me, generally it's boring. And here I am evangelizing compliance. Why? Because there's something that's happening out there, David, that's it's like something wicked this way comes. And I actually think many of the security brethren don't understand and haven't been paying attention to this incredible imminent, I think, risk to their programs and to their companies. And it's what the U.S. government does when it does things, I think, well, it actually gets the meat behind a program and gets everybody on the same sheet of music. And that's what's happening with CMMC. It's extremely different than your mother and father's firewall and compliance programs.
And maybe just for the folks that are not familiar with that, and I try to, have this show for everybody who's even people that are not specifically in the weeds for CMMC. So my understanding that CMMC was designed, the whole program was designed to control unclassified information, which is really, counterintuitive. Why do you need to protect unclassified information for? And, why do you need controls around that? And maybe the history behind, the whole program. And then there's after that, we'll talk a bit about kind of the differentiator between the, CMMC, DFARS, FAR, NIST, and so on. There's kind of like, similarities, but same, but different for some of these, controls.
Yeah, I mean, when you walk back, it's funny. I think a lot of people think this program CUI is a military program or DoD program. I don't think many people really know the origins of it. It comes from Obama. Obama decided, I think nobly, back in, I think it was around 2010-ish, maybe it was earlier than that. He created an executive order, which is the way we do legislation these days, right? And he created an executive order, said, you know what, I want to get rid of all of these various programs' names that we use for sensitive information that we've passed laws in the U.S. to protect, and I want to call it CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. So it actually starts from an executive order, and he charged every one of the agencies in the U.S. government to control their representative and requisite CUI, things that have laws against it. So, for example, the Department of Energy has laws against certain information for nuclear and regular energy generation. You have laws in the Department of Education for student data, and you have laws in HIPAA for healthcare data, as we're all familiar with. You have laws in the financial space, especially on the Gramm-Leach-Bliley. The terminology around PII or PPI or sensitive data that was protected by the U.S. government has all been transformed into CUI. Whether or not people realize it or not, that's the executive order that sits out there, and that's the order that the DoD took action on to define how the DoD, as they were requested by the executive order, how the DoD protects its CUI information. And then they took further action and said they're going to protect it in their supply chain. Now, I think many agencies have taken action, not all, and I think very few have actually taken dramatic actions at CUI in their supply chains. So CMMC, along with its heritage law called NIST, it's using NIST 800-171. It's called a 252-204-7012 DFARS Act. Was all focused on supply chain security and this notion around controlled unclassified information. Why is it necessary? Well, classified has its own programs already, but there is a lot about CUI that should be controlled, and not at the same level as classified, but controlled nevertheless. And that's the road that we're going down. What does it mean to control? It means that maybe it needs to be domiciled in the U.S. Maybe it needs to have U.S. nationals operate it. Maybe it needs to be supported by U.S. operations and U.S. people and U.S. persons. Maybe it's not allowed to be transferred to companies that don't have these kinds of controls and so forth. So that's the way that the program has unfolded.
In what are kind of the the pillars of the regulations? Like if if I came down one of those skyscrapers in New York, and I would ask you, hey, what is CMMC? What
Yeah.
is the top three things that we need to do in order for us to become compliant? And I know it's a tough question because there's a lot more, but in your mind, how would you explain it to somebody who's not familiar with that?
Yeah, right. If I was talking to my mother, this is what I would say. Listen, Mom, this is what the government has done is they've changed the whole equation. They're saying that you can no longer do business with the DoD. This is the way it works today. It's here today. You could no longer do business with the DoD if you don't have a driver's license, a security license, right? So they're requiring you to pre-certify your program before you can do a contract with them, right? So think about any other rule out there in the world, any other standard out there in the world. It doesn't work this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They say you must comply, and most companies go, yeah, just give me the money, let's do the contract and so forth. And they know in the back of their head they have malcompliance issues and so forth, but they'll just wait for the police or the lawyers or somebody to complain, a whistleblower. That's the way traditional compliance rules are. Pretty much all of them, even PCI, which is not a government function, it's a contractual function, and it has no criminality next to it. So the first thing is you can't get revenue if you're not compliant.
Which is huge, Carl. Why I don't think people realize that. What are we talking about? What's the U.S. Government budget for?
So this is where I'm saying about something wicked this way comes, right? So, the Defense Department, I think, is in the neighborhood of $750 billion. I think something like that.
It would be right. It's $1 billion. Yeah,
$1 billion, right? Exactly. However, this is so that's big enough. And by the way, they self-proclaim 350,000 contractors. What does a contractor mean? I mean, we all think of bomb makers, plane makers, tank makers, and so forth. That's not 350,000 companies. You know what's 350 companies? 350,000. They make chips. They make fans. They make alloys. They make metal. They make engineering services. They make architecture services. It doesn't mean they do janitorial services.
Right.
So anybody that makes $1 from the DoD, you clean base housing, you're a defense contractor.
Amazing. And then the supply chain. You're talking about the whole supply chain. So let's say a manufacturer or somebody who provides services to the government. What about their suppliers?
It's follow the CUI. It's like the bouncing CUI ball, right? So the way this works is that the ball comes at you in a contract, and you go, okay, I will get that contract. I'll get that. And they go, okay, great. You've been awarded the contract. And you go, great, this is a wonderful thing. And you go to sign that paperwork. And they go, first, I have to make sure you're in the system with your supplier performance risk system. You have to be either certified or in the system, proclaiming that you're compliant to the environment. Oh, you're not in the system? No contract, I'm sorry. Right? So, okay, so now I get certified in the system. And I've signed that paperwork and so forth, right? So, and by the way, that process of getting certified to be in the system, whether it be CMMC or NIST 800-171, no short process. Also, and here's another major difference between CMMC and most of the other stuff out there. And I'm not trying to be a fearmonger, because I can promise you that this is actually underway. It's like documented and underway. In fact, at CMMC Con, which we'll talk about later, we have a whistleblower that's pursuing some executives at a defense contractor for criminal negligence. They can go to jail. They could go to jail, right? Mm-hmm. So this law, when you go through and you sign your little paperwork and you tell them that you're complete and so forth, if you're lying, because one of the pieces that you sign is that you're under the perjury of the law and the False Claims Act of the United States, that you're telling the truth. And if you're lying, it's the akin of lying on your taxes. And if you remember how many people have been taken down, how many people have been taken down simply for misfiling taxes, right?
Yeah.
So this False Claims Act, and by the way, Rocketdyne is a great example, but not only, where whistleblowers are blowing on their companies the former CISO Rocketdyne whistleblew Rocketdyne And the U.S. District Attorney in Northern California took up the case to prosecute Rocketdyne, right? Because they're saying, you know what, you can't just play around with this stuff. So you get this bouncing ball, you sign this document, you tell them that you're certified. Okay, that's great. The law also says that if that bouncing ball of information that either they pass down to you or you create a new bouncing ball as part of the contract, keep in mind that the government designs a lot of research projects where people are actually creating the information from which they need to be a custodian of in their process, right? It's a research and development contract and so forth. So either they hand you bouncing balls or you create bouncing balls. If those bouncing balls get touched by anybody outside of your organization, or you pass them or need participants in the creation of your bouncing balls, under that same contract, you have an obligation to put in the contract with your subcontractors or partners the clause that makes them also be certified. And they have to actually be certified in order to be working on that data, right? So think about managed security service companies or managed services companies like IT companies or cloud companies. There's a reason why Microsoft has 4 different cloud Azure operating environments. It's because these rules are not trivial. Otherwise, everything would just be on commercial, right? Azure. They're not trivial, and they're very, very serious. If it has to be done for Azure, do you think it doesn't have to be done for everybody else? If it has to be done for Amazon, no, of course not. These rules are going to change the ball.
Right, and it's pass or fail, right? It's not like, you have areas like other compliance regulatory environments where it's not really pass or fail. There's like degrees, I guess, of you becoming compliant, and you can gradually become "quote unquote" more compliant. But this is not the case here, right? It's really like a black and white almost.
So this is where things get funny, right? And I think this is an area where, frankly, I think a lot of people play into this area to their own net advantage from wherever they're situationally sitting. So there are essentially 4 contractual obligations that you can bind yourself to as a company that you'll have to have this. You'll have to have these conditions, these preconditions. One of those laws, the truth is, and very few people want to talk about this because it's uncomfortable for many security companies. The truth is one of those laws allows, by being mute to it, in other words, not saying that you need to be certified or fully compliant, but allowing for you to have this capability to do constant mitigation of your gaps. They're essentially tacitly allowing you to not have an all or nothing, that you must continuously work on your gaps, but you can continuously work on your gaps. And there's nothing in the law that says otherwise, right? The CMMC world says all or nothing, but it's also not really true. And why? Because the CMMC law, along with all the other laws, make a provision for you to disclose gaps to the CIO of the DoD, right? And it's a provision that, to my knowledge, almost nobody really does, right? So what I believe is going to happen, David, in the future, this is how I think of the world that my kids will enter. It'll be much like the taxes. Like you can imagine, before there was federal taxes, wasn't that long ago, by the way. The amendment for federal income taxes in the U.S. I think was in the 1920s. Mm-hmm. So before that, there was no federal income tax. So everything that we know and love about taxes was installed, and state and local really has been installed since. And now it's just a part of rote what we do every single year, every single moment, and so forth. So I believe that your certification of your security program and filing to the U.S. government of your security program will become routine, like anything else in life, like your 1040, like your tax forms in the U.S., right? I believe that, like your tax forms, or like when you sell your house, if you have exceptions to what is being called for, you need to disclose it. And by the way, the law calls for it today. What there's no tolerance for is for you to file that you're compliant and you don't have any disclosures. So it'd be like selling your house while you knowingly have a hole in your roof, right? You have made a fraudulent sale because the house is not where it's supposed to be. You need to disclose those kinds of problems when you're selling your house. And it's the same with what the government is asking you, is that you need to put on file those areas that you're either not going to comply with, or you have any semblance of knowledge of how to comply with, or cost compliance. And you need to get those approved by the CIO of the DoD. Now, most people are reticent to do that, but I think in the future, that's going to become a more routine avenue.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm also, I suspect that with that, the CMMC-like regulatory environment is going to trickle to other industries.
Yeah,
that's just my take on it, just from seeing how things progress, right?
So that's where the wickedness comes. So there's a lot of these like movements that are going on, and sometimes it's hard to kind of always weave it together and kind of try to make sense out of it. So you have what the DoD is going, and if you're like me, you're like, who cares? If I don't take a contract with the DoD, I don't ever have to worry about this. Not so fast, right? Why? Two reasons. One is already CMMC has been, at least in part, adopted by the General Services Administration in two large contracts. In fact, the two largest contracts they have, the Polaris contracts and the STARS contracts. And Keith Nakasone, the guy that did that, will be speaking at the CMMC Con. I interviewed him, and you can talk to him about his opinions about where CMMC is going with the GSA, and that's got a large future in the GSA, in his opinion. And the second is DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, has already adopted in peace CMMC in some of their smaller agencies. But forget that. So, okay, if I don't do DHS, if I don't do GSA, if I don't do DoD, if I just leave the U.S. government alone, I don't have to worry about this. Something wicked this way comes. Joe Biden puts together an executive order on cybersecurity. I think we all heard about it. And most people focused on all the vendor terminology of zero trust and blah, 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 right? But what was in there was a directive to every single agency to come back to Joe Biden with their plan on how they're going to do supply chain security. That comeback was requested by September 12th, about 5 days ago. So presumptively, 5 days ago, all the agencies had provided for a comprehensive understanding of how they plan on implementing supply chain security. You know, we have to wait to see what their answers were. But I think, there's two things going in favor in either CMMC's direction or CMMC like the father of CMMC or CMMC 2.0 or CMMC next generation or whatever you want to call it, is that, first of all, he gave them like 60 days or something like that to be able to respond. And I don't know what bureaucrats work during the summertime. So I think that, the path of least resistance is to take a look at what's already been done and that's been working and has been out there and kind of try to modify that or create something brand new. The jury that's sitting out there, the good money, is being betting on the fact that every single U.S. agency will have start to adopt something that's either CMMC or the father of CMMC, something CMMC-like. Which means the total spend of the U.S. government, if you're a vendor or a subcontractor, and that's the other thing that people don't really understand, is that this flows all the way down to the subs. And if you're a subcontractor to a vendor that does business with the U.S. government, now you must comply. So now you can even say to yourself, I'm not going to do business with the U.S. government. But can you really say to yourself, I'm not going to do business with a business that does business with the U.S. government? Can you really say that? So I guess what I'm really getting at is I believe that this becomes now, in that situation, and this is my, like crystal ball, I believe it becomes de facto the standard, right? Who's going to go to business without having that hunting license, without having that driver's license, to be able to do currency with companies that do business with the U.S. government? I just think it's It's, if you're, it's like Underwriter's Laboratory, right? You're going to do business with a product that doesn't have an UL listing, right? And that's the challenge that you have here, is it becomes essentially the de facto new standard that everybody must rise to achieve. And that upsets people's apple carts on many different levels, because this standard, although, it has a lot of chance for change going forward, as it stands today, has no deference to the achievement of any other standards out there. It's the one ring that stands above them all, right, kind of thing. And so if you have an ISO, as it stands today, and I know there's a lot of dialogue about this, if you have an ISO certification, if you got a HIPAA certification, a PCI certification, if you got a certification, from your mother's swimming team, it doesn't make a difference to them. You must go through their process for certification, and you have no reciprocity for anything else that you've done.
Yeah, and even though there might be some overlap, like in the controls, for some of these, compliance. So when you, so I'm assuming that you get customers like looking for help, because all this, eventually some of it, if not all, sinks in, and then you come in and talk to them for the first time, and you are not very familiar with consultative type of sale. Like, how do you approach? I mean, it's such a large topic. How do you approach a customer and start that journey to become compliant?
Well, there's a couple things with that, David. Thank you for the question, by the way. I think a lot of people that are in my my ecosystem, they can't believe that there are companies out there that haven't started a security program or haven't done anything with their security. And it's because they kind of sit in their own echo chamber. They're normally employed by companies that are e-commerce or internet facing or financial services or healthcare services. But they're not employed by manufacturers. They're not typically employed by professional services organizations like a professional architecture company. They're not employed by professional research and development companies, the ones that actually do real research. Often are not employed by schools that have research grants. They might be a school CISO, but they're not normally involved in the research part of the schools and so forth. Why? Because manufacturers, as an example, they don't have any real security concerns in terms of the law compliance, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no personal identifiable. I mean, if you're a tool and die manufacturer, what rule out there forces you to comply, especially if you're not a public company, which most of them are not? So you're making wire harnessing for an F-22. You do, switches for a tank or bomber or something like that. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be as sophisticated as that. You could make alloy resins that go into space vehicles. You could just be doing carbon fiber manufacturing, in a piece of your business, 5% deals with a structure that goes into something that goes into a space vehicle, right? And you're a sub to a prime and you have to comply if you want that 5% of your revenue to be viable going forward. So it's a long answer to basically say almost, I wouldn't say all of them, I would say about a healthy part of these companies get surprised by the requirement because they're not following it like we are. And all they care about is getting their revenue unlocked, right? Because what they see is a contracting officer somewhere, either at their prime contractor or the U.S. government. And this happens. I get these phone calls nearly every day where the prime contractor says, I don't see your score in a supplier performance risk system. I can no longer issue you any contracts or, for that matter, any more checks on the contract that you have right now with us. You must comply. And that stops their business like instantly. And all of a sudden it becomes priority number one. They need to get it done with, and all they care about is getting it done with. And then they bellyache about costs and about process changes and so forth, but they understand they need to get it done. Some of them, if their business isn't defined by DoD contracting, really kind of take a hard look at whether or not they want to continue on with this revenue stream. But I think most understand that this is the future, not an aberration.
And it's really a journey, right? So I'm assuming a recommendation would be to start now, and then there are certain priorities, right? So again, it's like you have to figure out what's the quickest way to get there, and what's kind of the biggest bang for the buck. Like, where should you pay attention to first? Because how many attributes or configurations are to the CMMC regulation? I mean, it was like 300, 400. I mean, it's quite a bit. Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really disheartening and very disquieting about what the government has done in this space is they did exactly what they shouldn't have done in the pursuit of this program, in that it's complicated, right? I mean, there's no other way to say it.
It is.
Like, it's complicated. They created a new language. They created new conditions. There's exceptions for nearly every rule that you talk about and so forth. Guess what? It's just like the U.S. taxes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there are people that are getting certified now to become, CMMC professionals, where they consult, just like almost like a tax advisor. You need to be on top of it. So it's exactly, and I love the analogy between the two, because it's exactly that. There are people that are becoming tax advisors or accountants. There are people becoming CMMC advisors, right?
And by the way, you can't just go hire Joe and John, who happens to be your stepson's brother, or whatever, it's a friend, to be your auditor unless they've been certified, right? And that's the right thing to do. That's one of the reasons why the standard is so resilient, is that the working papers and the individuals themselves have to go through background checks, have to go through certification trials, have to go through knowledge trials and experience level evaluations, resumes, and so forth, in order for them to be actually eligible to conduct your assessment. It's not like you can just get anybody. And like most of the other standards that are out there, you can just pull somebody that doesn't necessarily have HIPAA knowledge, and you can do a HIPAA high trust review. It can be done, right? PCI is another great example. Yeah, okay, you have QSA auditors, but you want to do a pre-assessment, you want to kind of brush yourself up. And even in that situation, if you make a mistake, it's a contractual problem. Your worst case scenarios, you can't charge the credit cards, and you get charged a fine. The worst case scenario in this environment is you can go to jail, and your fine is 3 times the cost of the overall contract that you let. So if you had $1 billion contract, and by the way, it's not can be 3 times. It will be 3 times. The way the law reads on false claims is that the judge's hands are completely locked, and you got to come to CMMC Con and listen to these guys talk about this. That if the claim is false that you had made, your fine is in the law very clear. 3 times the contract value, no exceptions, right? So if you had a $1 contract, your fine is $3. If you had $1 billion contract, your fine is $3 billion. Not how much profit you made on the contract, not how much cost you made on it's how much the value of the contract was.
Yeah, that's incredible. And listen, I would love to do more of these, and I think we should. We should peel the onion on some of the CMC areas, and maybe kind of focus on some areas for the next sessions, and maybe dive a little deeper on some of these. Because again, I think that a lot of people are not aware how complex, the CMMC regulation is.
Yeah.
But before we jump into that, I would love to hear a bit more about 2 things. One is, what is CMMC Con? Who should attend? Why? What to expect in that event? It's coming up soon.
It's the coolest convention actually out there in this space, right? So, I think there's some pretty cool conventions out there, but it's a virtual convention, and it's a convention. So that means it's a platform. I don't know, maybe you guys have been to these kinds of platforms before, but I haven't before I've been to CMMC Con. It looks like you're going to a convention, like a convention center, and but it's all virtual. So there's a huge a capability for you to do many things at the same time within the convention and self-service yourself. So you don't have to, it's not like a webinar necessarily, but you can go in and actually start some of the sessions yourself, and you can go into some of the vendor booths and
roam around
like you would do at a convention, right?
Bit of a wanderlust, I guess.
Yeah, right. And then, so we have wonderful speakers that are there. You have Dr. Rob Spalding giving a whole discussion of the Chinese threat. He's amazing. He wrote a book, and he basically makes you get up and you leave a little wet spot on your chair when you finish listening to him talk, And then we have, like I mentioned, the PTAC folks. We have Keith Nakasone from the GSA. We have Jeff Dalton from the CMMC Advisory Board of Directors. He's a really great guy. By the way, one of the things he's doing on the side is building his own airplane. Who else do we have? We have an executive from Microsoft who is sponsoring the event, doing a great discussion about what Microsoft is doing and how they're viewing the requirements and the tool sets that they're putting together for this. And we have, who else is out there? I'm forgetting somebody. I feel terrible about that. Don't you always forget somebody when you do something off the top of your head like that,
Always. And this was completely unscripted, just so everybody knows.
Yeah. So whoever that is, I apologize in advance.
So where can people sign up? What's the easiest way to do it?
CMMC Con. You can just do a quick Google CMMC Con 2021 registration. It's out there. It's free. There's like 1,200 people already signed up, so it's a very big event, and you'll get sent course materials thereafter. And there's some really cool other stuff that's going on. We did a ninja training event, and we're handing out some black belts while we're there and all of that, David. So, and hopefully we can get you involved. That's the goal, right?
That'd be great. And hope is not a strategy, Carl. I want in.
It can be if you're part of an underground U-boat or right?
Carl, it's been a real pleasure. We should do this very soon. Again, we'll pick up a topic, and again, we unravel because I think there's a lot to unravel. So thank you very much for joining today. Thanks all for joining.
But next time I need to be you, and then you be me, and I'll interview you. I'll turn off my lights, and you can turn on your lights.
Yeah, we'll do an inverse of the backgrounds, but we'll take everybody by surprise. So we'll have to figure out how to do that.
The way we have to set up, it's like two sides of the coin,
Always a pleasure, Carl. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Take care, all. Thanks all for joining. Be safe.